There's a difference between what happens and what we think it means. A description is what a camera would record, like the crowd chanting loudly, and an interpretation is the story we add. For example, the mob grew aggressive. Same scene, different impact. Once we label something with emotion or motive, it's hard to see it clearly again. Journalism, history, relationships, this bias shapes them all. When we interpret too quickly, we miss what's actually there. We react based on assumptions, not facts. Sticking to description trains our mind to stay objective. It helps us avoid bias, improves our judgment, and reduce conflict. It forces our brain to slow down and see clearly before jumping to conclusions. Observation isn't thinking. You saw a person frown. Your brain said, they're angry, but are they angry or just in pain or lost in thought or even responding to something you didn't see? That small moment of doubt is the start of real thinking. Most people confuse perception with understanding. Seeing is easy, thinking is not. Observation gives you the pieces, but thinking figures out how those pieces fit. Imagine sitting at a cafe. You see someone spill coffee and slam their phone down. Instantly, your brain might go, they must be frustrated with someone, but what if they just received bad news? What if it was an accident and they're embarrassed? At level 1, you're not judging, you're observing your own interpretation. You realize your brain doesn't show reality like a camera. It edits like a film director. It zooms in, adds music, and sometimes creates stories out of thin air. Here's a simple way to test this. Next time something catches your attention, write down exactly what you saw or heard, not what you felt about it. Then, beside it, write the conclusion your mind jumped to. You'll be surprised how often the two don't match. Critical thinking begins the moment you realize that I saw it doesn't mean I understand it. The world isn't just out there, it's also being filtered through you. This level is about learning to say, I noticed this, what else might it mean? Before you analyze, assume less. Asking why. Children are natural philosophers. They ask why until they drive you mad. Why is the sky blue? Because of light and the atmosphere. But why does light do that? Somewhere along the way, we stop. Not because we understand, but because we're trained to accept. Adults stop asking why because it breaks routine. It leads to challenge. It disrupts what we think we know. At this level of critical thinking, you bring why back, fearlessly. Not to be annoying, but to reveal structure. Why do schools have bells? Why is money designed the way it is? Why do people follow leaders? Everything around you was built by someone, once. That means it can be rebuilt, changed, improved, or questioned. Take the idea of success. Why is working 60 hours a week, buying a house, and retiring at 65 the standard? Who decided that, and why? This kind of thinking gives you power. Systems are just solutions to old problems. But if you don't ask why they exist, you won't see when they stop working. A thinker at this point doesn't rebel for drama. They rebel when logic stops working. They don't assume the world makes sense. They ask, why does this system exist? Who benefits from it? What does it assume? Simple exercise. Take any belief you hold. Now ask, why do I believe this? Then ask, where did I learn that? Do it 3 more times. You'll either hit clarity or discomfort. Both are useful. What's missing? You scroll through Instagram. Everyone looks perfect. What's missing? You're reading an article about a political event. It quotes 3 people from one side, none from the other. What's missing? You hear a coworker talking about their promotion, but not the burnout they faced before that. What's missing? This stage is about noticing absence. It's about understanding that reality isn't just made of what's there, but also what's left out. You begin to see how storytelling works. Every message is shaped by inclusion and exclusion. We rarely notice it because our brains don't crave truth. They crave completion. They fill in gaps fast. But at this point, you slow down and say, what am I not seeing? What's been edited out? For instance, a weight loss ad shows a smiling person after 30 days. It doesn't show the people who followed the plan and saw no results, or those who got injured, or the psychological cost. In media, this shows up as bias. In relationships, as miscommunication. In data, as cherry picking. You learn to question. What voices aren't here? What evidence is excluded? What would someone with the opposite view say? Critical thinking isn't always about decoding what's in front of you. It's about seeing the blank spots. That's where the real story often lives. Seeing assumptions. Every belief you hold is sitting on a floor made of assumptions. Problem is, we walk on that floor without ever looking down. Here's how it plays out. You believe that people who fail didn't work hard enough. That belief may be based on the assumption that effort equals outcome. But is that always true? Think about athletes who trained for years but never made it, or startups that collapsed during a recession. Were they just lazy or unlucky? This kind of thinking is about identifying the invisible, the taken for granted, the beliefs we inherit, absorb, or internalize without conscious approval. You assume that old people are wise, that technology always improves life, that democracy is the only moral system, that your culture is normal. But assumptions are like lenses. They color your view without your permission, and if you don't recognize them, you mistake their tint for the natural light. Here's an exercise. When you have a strong opinion, ask, what needs to be true for me to believe this? Then test those things. Example, belief, this city is unsafe at night. Assumptions, crime stats are accurate, news coverage is fair, people I trust haven't exaggerated. Once you expose the roots of your beliefs, you can either reinforce them with better data or let go of what no longer serves. This stage is powerful because it brings you face to face with the scaffolding of your mind. Once you start seeing assumptions, you stop mistaking belief for truth, and you begin to build your thinking on a sturdier foundation. Causation versus correlation. A small town installs more streetlights. Crime goes up. Did the lights cause the crime? No. Probably more lights were added because crime increased, not the other way around. But many people would assume the first explanation. That's the confusion between correlation, that is two things happening together, and causation, that is one thing causing the other. Our brains are wired to spot patterns. It's a survival instinct. But in modern life, this often leads us astray. We link things that aren't linked. We mistake coincidence for causality. It's why some people believe vaccines cause diseases, or that violent video games lead to real-world violence. The timing may align, but the mechanism, the how, is missing. People at this stage ask, is there a third factor causing both events? Has this been tested under controlled conditions? Is the connection plausible or just convenient? This kind of thinking trains you to say, I see the pattern, but is it meaningful? You start craving evidence, not just overlap. Truth versus confirmation. We all think we want the truth, but most of the time, we just want to be right. You read an article that agrees with your opinion, you feel validated, but did you learn anything? Or did you just confirm what you already believed? This is confirmation bias, the tendency to favor information that supports what we already think. Critical thinkers fight this bias on purpose. They read the other side. They engage with opposing views, not to own them, but to test their own logic. It's like this. If your beliefs can't survive a challenge, maybe they're not as strong as you thought. Let's say you believe social media is destroying mental health. That's a fair concern, but are you open to studies showing it can boost the mood if used in moderation? This kind of thinking makes you aware of how algorithms feed you what you like, news tailored to your view, friends who echo your words, a digital bubble that feels like truth but might just be noise. When you read something that makes you say, yes, ask, would I still agree if it came from a source I dislike? Flip it. Could the other side say the same thing about you? Truth-seeking is uncomfortable. It forces you to admit ignorance, complexity, or contradiction, but this discomfort is what makes thinking honest. Framing shapes thinking. Words aren't just words. They shape how we feel, what we decide, even what we remember. A politician says, tax relief. Sounds good, right? But think about it. Relief implies pain, that taxes are a burden. If instead they said shared contribution, it would sound like community effort. Same policy, different frame. Framing is the art of presenting information in a way that influences perception. It's everywhere. A company says, we're downsizing to increase efficiency. A friend says, I'm not late, I'm just on my own timeline. A government calls war peacekeeping. This stage helps you dissect the language. You ask, what's the emotional trigger here? What's another way to say the same thing? Is this phrasing hiding something? It's not about nitpicking, it's about decoding. Because every sentence carries a mood, and that mood shapes our response. Now, take a controversial news headline, reword it in 3 different tones, neutral, positive, and negative. You'll see how easily emotion can be injected into facts. When you master this kind of thinking, you stop reacting to headlines. You start rephrasing them in your mind. You become immune to spin. Spot the loaded question. Why are you so defensive? That's not really a question. It's a trap. It implies guilt. Before you can even respond, you're boxed in. This is the world of loaded questions. Questions that come with assumptions baked in. A loaded question is like being asked, have you stopped cheating? Whether you say yes or no, you're admitting you cheated at some point. It forces a narrative without your consent. People at this stage recognize the shape of these verbal traps. They don't just hear the words, they hear the frame behind the words. Common examples. Why do liberals hate freedom? Why do conservatives hate poor people? Why don't you care about the truth? These are not good faith inquiries. They're rhetorical sneak attacks. At this point, you learn to do 2 things. Unpack the hidden assumption. Refuse the framing. You say, let's pause. That question assumes something that I don't accept. Let's clarify what you're really asking. This kind of thinking trains you in the art of reframing. Because sometimes the smartest move is not to answer the question, but to question the question. As an experiment, take a heated topic you care about. Imagine someone asking a hostile version of it. Then rewrite the question as if it came from a curious, neutral person. You'll feel the difference immediately. The skill here isn't about avoiding hard questions. It's about making sure the question is honest before you try to answer it. Appeal to authority. He's a doctor. He must be right. She's a best-selling author. They're an expert. We crave certainty, and experts often provide it. But critical thinking means you don't stop at credentials. The appeal to authority is a fallacy when the person's status is used in place of a good argument. Just because someone is famous, educated, or successful doesn't mean their opinion is correct or even informed. Critical thinkers separate status from substance. Ask, is this person speaking within their domain of expertise? Are they presenting evidence or just leaning on their title? Do other credible experts agree, or is this a fringe view with a loud platform? Example, a Nobel Prize winner in physics talking about climate science may sound authoritative, but unless they're trained in that field, their opinion is not necessarily more valid than a qualified researcher's. Another case, a YouTuber with millions of followers gives medical advice. It sounds confident, it's persuasive, but is it based on peer-reviewed studies or just personal anecdotes? To practice this thinking, you can find a controversial claim from someone with high status. Strip away their name and position. Would the claim still convince you on its own? If not, the authority was doing the heavy lifting, not the logic. Respect credentials, but test arguments. Data can lie. 75% of people are happier after using this product. Sounds impressive, right? Until you realize the survey had only 8 people, or that happier wasn't defined, or that it came from the company selling the product. Data can deceive, not because numbers are evil, but because people use numbers to push narratives. Now, you stop being impressed by statistics alone. You start asking, what's the source? What's the sample size? Who funded this research? Are there important details left out? Even charts can be rigged. Scale manipulation, selective data, truncated axes, visuals can exaggerate or minimize trends depending on how they're presented. For instance, 2 political parties cite the same unemployment rate. One says, lowest in decades. The other says, still worse than pre-pandemic. Both can be technically true, and both can be misleading depending on the framing. Data can also hide suffering. A country's GDP can grow while poverty increases. A company's profits rise while employee burnout soars. The average doesn't always speak for the individual. People at this stage learn to read data like detectives, not believers. When you understand how data can be used, you become harder to fool and smarter in how you use numbers yourself. Logical fallacies. Don't listen to her. She's just a college dropout. If we let people marry whoever they want, next they'll be marrying animals. You can't trust anything from that website. These aren't arguments, they're fallacies, errors in reasoning that sound persuasive but fall apart under scrutiny. Here are a few classics of the faulty logics. Straw man, misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack. Ad hominem, attacking the person instead of the argument. Slippery slope, assuming one step will inevitably lead to a catastrophic chain of events. False dilemma, presenting 2 options as the only ones when more exist. Appeal to ignorance, saying something must be true because it hasn't been proven false. Learning these is like putting on X-ray glasses. Suddenly, arguments you once accepted fall apart under the weight of their own flaws. This kind of thinking is where your mind becomes cleaner, your words sharper, and your confidence grounded in clarity. You stop arguing to win, you argue to understand. Recognizing cognitive biases. Our brains weren't built for clarity, they were built for survival, and survival favors speed over precision. Cognitive biases are shortcuts, mental defaults that help us react quickly, but often at the cost of accuracy. They shape how we see the world, even when we think we're being logical. People at this stage start seeing these glitches in real time. They don't try to eliminate bias, that's impossible, but they learn to notice when it's in play. Common biases. Anchoring bias. You rely too heavily on the first piece of information. Availability, heuristic. You think something is common because it's easy to remember. Confirmation bias. You notice things that confirm what you already believe. Negativity bias. You give more weight to negative experiences. Let's say you hear about a plane crash. Your brain suddenly overestimates the danger of flying, even though statistically, it's still far safer than driving. That's availability bias. This stage is about building meta-awareness. It's not just about spotting flawed thinking in others, it's catching it in yourself before it takes over. Complexity over simplicity. Simple answers feel good, but most important questions aren't simple. People at this stage get suspicious of neat stories. They're allergic to oversimplification. They know that real-life problems, climate change, education, inequality, mental health, have layers, trade-offs, history. When someone says, "Just do X and everything will be fine," your job is to pause and ask, what does this leave out? Who benefits from this framing? What happens if it goes wrong? Complexity doesn't mean confusion, it means precision. At this point, you learn to tolerate gray areas. You stop needing every issue to fit into clear categories. You can say, "This part makes sense, but I'm unsure about the rest." That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Example, universal basic income sounds amazing or terrifying, depending on who's talking. But the truth isn't all or nothing. A thinker breaks it down. How would it work? What trials have been done? What are unintended consequences? The smarter you get, the less sure you sound. Not because you know less, but because you finally see how big the questions really are. Complexity over simplicity. Simple answers feel satisfying, but most important questions aren't simple. At a certain point, people start getting wary of neat explanations. They recognize the discomfort that comes with oversimplifying real problems. Issues like inequality, climate, education, or mental health aren't one layer deep. They come with trade-offs, histories, and side effects. When a solution sounds too clean, "Just do this and it'll work," it's time to pause and ask, what's being left out? Who benefits from this framing? What are the possible downsides? Complexity isn't confusion, it's accuracy. This kind of thinking allows for uncertainty. It accepts that not everything fits in a box. It's possible to say, "One part of this is true, the rest I'm still figuring out." That's not a weakness, it's intellectual maturity. The deeper someone goes into a topic, the less they tend to speak in absolutes. Not because they're unsure, but because they've seen how layered truth really is. Thinking about thinking or metacognition. Here's the ultimate unlock. Realizing that your thoughts are not facts, they're events in your mind, and you can think about them just like watching clouds go by. This stage is metacognition, the ability to observe your own thinking in real time. You begin asking, why did I jump to that conclusion? What kind of mental habit just kicked in? What belief of mine just got threatened? This is where critical thinking becomes self-reflection. You no longer just analyze the world, you analyze your lens. You ask, what's shaping how I think? Metacognition makes you a better learner, leader, partner, and problem solver. Because you stop being reactive, you start responding with awareness. This kind of thinking doesn't make you perfect, it makes you free. Free from automatic habits, ego traps, emotional spirals, and biased loops. Metacognition is the final shift from living on autopilot to living with intention. The fallacy of certainty. Certainty is seductive. It feels solid, comfortable, final. But often, it's just laziness dressed up as confidence. People at this stage get suspicious of certainty, especially their own. They realize that the louder someone declares, "I'm sure," the more important it is to ask, how do they know? What are they not seeing? What are they ignoring to sound so sure? We crave certainty because uncertainty makes us anxious. But progress doesn't come from comfort. It comes from questioning. The best thinkers admit when they don't know. Einstein didn't say, "I'm sure." He said, "I wonder." Here's a truth. Most of what we believe is probabilistic. It's based on likelihood, not guarantees. Good critical thinking is probabilistic too. It says, "This seems likely, but I'm open to being wrong." This kind of thinking is a shift from declaring to exploring. You stop trying to win arguments. You start refining your models. Because if your beliefs can't evolve, they'll eventually become your prison. Intellectual humility. You're not the smartest person in the room, and even if you are, that's not the point. Intellectual humility isn't about pretending to be dumb. It's about knowing that being smart doesn't make you immune to error. People at this stage ask better questions because they know they don't know everything. They don't fear being wrong, they fear staying wrong because of ego. Traits of intellectual humility: listening without interrupting, saying "I don't know" without shame, being willing to change your mind in public, seeking feedback from people who disagree with you. Think of someone who's brilliant but unbearable. They talk over others, they condescend, they think being right is the end of the game. Now contrast that with someone who says, "Here's how I see it, but I could be off." Which one do you trust more? At this point, you don't just seek truth, you seek the mindset that's best at finding truth, and humility sharpens everything. Context is king. Facts without context are noise, or worse, misleading. At this point, people are obsessed with the full picture. They know that information doesn't exist in a vacuum. Example: a country cuts taxes, the economy booms. Good policy, right? Maybe. But what if oil prices also dropped, or a tech boom happened, or inflation was delayed by a global trend? Without context, even facts become distorted. Context includes time. When did this happen? Scale. How big is the sample? Culture. What norms or history shape this? Motive. Who is sharing this and why? You see this in politics, business, even personal stories. Someone says they got fired and your brain fills in the blank. But maybe they quit. Maybe they took the fall for someone else. Maybe it was mutual. This kind of thinking helps you pause, ask better questions, resist the instinct to jump to conclusions. Truth without context is half blind. This kind of thinking trains your brain to zoom out before zooming in. Nuance detection. The world doesn't come in clean categories. Most issues are not black or white. They're murky, layered, and full of trade-offs. Thinkers develop a radar for nuance. They know that good versus bad is rarely the full story. They get curious about exceptions, edge cases, and in-between spaces. Nuance means being able to say, yes, but also, that's partly true depending on. It's complicated, and here's why. Think of the question, is capitalism good or bad? Thinkers don't just argue for or against, they break it down. What kind of capitalism? In what country? With what regulations? At what point in history? This kind of thinking is about moving past hot takes and headlines. It's about building the mental stamina to hold more than one idea at once. Because most truth lives in the tension, not the extremes. Pattern recognition and mental models. Thinkers don't just react to the world, they start seeing patterns behind the events. They use mental models, reliable frameworks to interpret reality, like first principles thinking, breaking down a problem to its basics. Second order thinking, what happens next? Inversion, what if I tried to cause the opposite? Opportunity cost, what am I not doing by choosing this? Mental models turn raw data into usable insight. This kind of thinking upgrades your brain from a collection of opinions to a system of strategy. Thinking at different scales. Most people think at one scale, personal. Thinkers shift perspectives across scales. Micro, individual. Meso, community system. Macro, society, world, historical trends. They can toggle between how does this affect me and how does this shape culture over decades. For instance, a school bans phones. At the micro level, one student gets annoyed. At the meso level, the school changes its culture. At the macro level, it might influence national policy on tech and kids. This kind of thinking turns you into a zoom lens, able to shift from ant-sized to eagle view thinking. Long-term versus short-term thinking. Our brains crave now dopamine hits, quick wins, but most progress, personal, intellectual, moral, requires long-term thinking. Thinkers can delay gratification for greater gain. They think in decades, not just days. They ask, will this still matter in 5 years? Am I solving for today's comfort or tomorrow's values? What am I trading long-term stability for short-term relief? For example, investing in deep learning versus scrolling TikTok, reading a dense book versus skimming a thread, speaking truth gently to a friend versus avoiding the conversation. The returns aren't instant, but they compound. This thinking shifts your life from reactive to intentional. Discomfort as data. When something makes you uncomfortable, an idea, a criticism, a contradiction, your first instinct is to reject it. But thinkers pause. They treat discomfort as data. Discomfort means something here touches a nerve. Why? What belief is being challenged? What fear is being triggered? This kind of thinking flips the script. Instead of running from discomfort, you study it, trace it, learn from it. Let's say you hear someone criticize your work. You feel attacked. A thinker separates ego from evidence. Are they wrong? Or are they just right in a way I didn't expect? Discomfort is often the doorway to deeper self-knowledge if you dare to walk through it. Integrating opposites. Can you be disciplined and flexible, idealistic and pragmatic, critical and compassionate? Thinkers hold opposing traits in balance. They don't pick sides, they integrate them. This is dialectical thinking. It says, two truths can live in tension without canceling each other out. Example, empathy doesn't mean agreeing with everyone. Strength doesn't mean being unfeeling. Doubt doesn't mean paralysis. At this point, your thinking becomes multidimensional. You stop choosing either or and start designing both and. Intellectual resilience. Ideas evolve, evidence shifts, certainties crumble. What holds? Thinkers develop intellectual resilience, the ability to absorb change without losing their integrity. They stay grounded when their views are challenged, their heroes disappoint, their beliefs need updating. Resilient thinkers don't cling to outdated mental models, but they also don't chase every trend. They revise carefully, deliberately. They ask, has something genuinely changed, or am I just emotionally reactive? Do I need to rethink this, or just learn more first? What one can do is write a belief you once held strongly that you no longer hold. What changed you? What did that process teach you about your own mind? Intellectual resilience is what turns thinkers into leaders. Ethical clarity. Thinking clearly is one thing. Acting with clarity is another. People at this stage begin integrating ethics into every question. Not just what's true, but what's right, what's fair, who is affected. They don't outsource morality to authority or tradition. They take responsibility for it. This means checking who benefits or suffers from a decision, considering harm beyond intention, understanding power, privilege, and responsibility. This kind of thinking grounds your thinking in something deeper than cleverness. It makes your ideas not just sharp, but humane. Strategic doubt. Not all doubt is weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Critical thinkers use strategic doubt not to paralyze themselves, but to stay sharp. They don't doubt everything randomly. They doubt things on purpose and in specific places. They ask, what here should I test again? What assumption is hiding underneath this conclusion? If this fails, what part will have been the weakest link? Strategic doubt is like pressure testing a bridge. You don't want it to collapse before you know where it bends. For instance, you're launching a project. You don't just assume it'll work. You make yourself argue the failure scenario, then patch that vulnerability before you act. This kind of thinking isn't about self-sabotage. It's about using doubt as a design tool. Philosophical flexibility. Life throws us into paradox. We value truth, but lie to protect someone. We seek freedom, but crave structure. We want justice, but fear chaos. Thinkers don't demand perfect alignment in every situation. They understand that real life creates philosophical tension. This means being able to shift from deontology, duty-based thinking, to consequentialism, results-based thinking, depending on the context. Hold sacred values without weaponizing them. Accept that some questions don't have one right answer. This kind of thinking turns your mind into a dynamic, ethical system, not a brittle code. Thinking in paradoxes. Most people freeze at contradiction. Thinkers embrace it. They understand that paradox isn't failure. It's reality trying to stretch you. Paradoxes aren't to be solved. They're to be held. Examples. The more you know, the less you're sure. To lead others, you must serve them. The more you chase happiness, the more it slips away. Thinkers don't rush to resolve paradox. They use it to stay humble, agile, and awake. They say, both of these things can be true, and I can live inside the tension. This kind of thinking is less about control and more about awareness. It's thinking as presence. Psychological self-awareness. To think clearly, you must also know what clouds your mind. Thinkers gain deep psychological self-awareness. They know their triggers, their emotional blind spots, their ego habits. They ask, what patterns keep repeating in my reactions? When do I get intellectually lazy, and why? What emotional need is driving this belief? It's not therapy, it's internal diagnostics. This kind of thinking makes your thinking honest, not just in logic, but in motive. You don't just know what you think, you begin to understand why you think it. Reframing the narrative. Stories run your mind, not just novels or news, but the internal story you tell yourself about events, people, and your own role in life. People at this stage learn to reframe. They don't blindly accept the first narrative that comes to mind. They reshape it for clarity, agency, and perspective. Instead of, why is this happening to me? They ask, what's the opportunity in this? Reframing doesn't deny pain, it adds dimension. For instance, you fail at a job interview. The default story? I'm not good enough. A reframe. That was data about what I need to sharpen. Plus, it wasn't a culture fit. Reframing isn't fake positivity, it's cognitive flexibility. This kind of thinking lets you move from victim to narrator. Systems of influence. People at this stage start seeing how influence flows in networks, not just between people, but through media, education, money, and culture. They ask, who benefits from this message? What incentives shape this conclusion? What system reinforces this pattern? It's not about conspiracy thinking, it's about structure awareness. Real power doesn't yell, it embeds itself in the defaults. At this point, you stop reacting to the surface and start reading the system behind the signal. The principle of charity. It's easy to assume the worst in other people's arguments, but thinkers practice the principle of charity, interpreting others in the strongest, most reasonable light before responding. Instead of dunking on a bad tweet, they ask, what's the best version of this idea? This doesn't mean agreement, it means rigor. You build steel men, not straw men. You listen to learn, not just to reply. You distinguish between sloppy thinking and an honest difference in values. This kind of thinking makes your critique fair, not just clever, and it builds intellectual credibility that lasts. Deep time perspective. Most people think in hours, days, maybe months, but thinkers engage with deep time, decades, centuries, even epochs. They think about legacy, unintended consequences, historical echoes. They ask, how will this decision age? What story will this generation leave behind? What does this moment look like from the year 2200, say, Debates on AI, climate, or genetic engineering make no sense without a deep time lens. The short-term payoff might blind us to irreversible shifts. This kind of thinking gives you clarity that transcends urgency. You stop chasing immediacy. You start stewarding impact. Ethical complexity. At this point, thinkers confront the reality that ethical decisions rarely come with easy answers. Moral clarity is desirable, but often unrealistic. Ethical complexity means accepting that most decisions involve conflicting duties, unclear consequences, and imperfect information. It's not about reducing choices to a checklist of good versus bad. It's about understanding trade-offs, systemic implications, and moral tension as part of the human condition. They don't reduce decisions to a checklist of good versus bad. Instead, they weigh conflicting duties, systemic consequences, and imperfect information. They understand that good intentions can cause harm. Doing good for one group can mean risk for another. Some problems have no clean solution, just better and worse trade-offs. This kind of thinking matures your moral lens from rules to reasoned responsibility. Epistemic humility. What does it mean to truly know something? Epistemic humility is the awareness that knowledge is always partial. It's knowing the difference between belief, assumption, and fact, and being willing to revise even core convictions when new evidence or better arguments emerge. Awareness of the limits of their own knowledge. This means knowing the difference between belief, assumption, and fact. Being comfortable with uncertainty. Being open to revising even core ideas when new evidence emerges. At this point, truth becomes a lifelong relationship, not a one-time win. Psychological projection, awareness. Most people don't just see the world, they project themselves onto it. Psychological projection distorts thinking. It's the mind attributing its inner fears, habits, or judgments to others. Awareness of this pattern brings emotional clarity and helps separate perception from projection. The tendency to attribute one's own fears, desires, or patterns onto others. They begin to notice. I'm annoyed because I'm overwhelmed, not because they were rude. I assume they're judging me because I judge myself. I label them lazy, but I'm scared of appearing weak. This kind of thinking isn't about blame, it's about awareness. You can recall the last time someone triggered a strong reaction in you. Ask, was that about them or was it about something unresolved in me? Intellectual legacy. It isn't about being the smartest, it's about how your thinking echoes beyond you. At this point, you begin shaping your intellectual legacy, not as ego, but as contribution. You ask, what ways of thinking am I modeling for others? What will my questions teach someone 10 years from now? What kind of mind do I leave behind in the people I've influenced? This kind of thinking isn't loud, it's lasting. This kind of thinking isn't about answers. It's about the questions you pass on. It's about the questions you pass on. Argument ecology. Arguments don't exist in isolation. They form ecosystems. One belief supports another, which reinforces yet another. Sometimes it's not the argument that's wrong, it's the system it's plugged into. This kind of thinking is about argument ecology, learning to see how beliefs, assumptions, incentives, and emotions interact. Someone may hold a flawed opinion, but trying to debunk it won't work until you understand the ecosystem it lives in. Maybe it's tied to their identity. Maybe it protects them from fear. Maybe it's part of a larger narrative they rely on to make sense of the world. Understanding arguments in their context doesn't weaken your logic. It makes it effective. Cognitive endurance. Clear thinking isn't a burst. It's a stamina sport. Distraction is easy. Intellectual rigor takes cognitive endurance. This kind of thinking is about building the mental muscle to sit with complex ideas, wrestle with ambiguity, and not bail at the first sign of discomfort. It means reading a full book instead of skimming tweets, holding a difficult question without rushing to a half-baked answer, staying in inquiry even when clarity feels far away. So you can take 1 hour, no multitasking, just read, reflect, or write on one topic. Pay attention to when your brain wants to escape and resist. Track how long it takes before true focus kicks in. Cognitive endurance gives you access to ideas most people never reach because they tap out too early. Clear thinking isn't a burst, it's a stamina sport. Distraction is easy. Intellectual rigor takes cognitive endurance. This kind of thinking is about building the mental muscle to sit with complex ideas, wrestle with ambiguity, and not bail at the first sign of discomfort. It means reading a full book instead of skimming tweets, holding a difficult question without rushing to a half-baked answer, staying in inquiry even when clarity feels far away. So you can take 1 hour, no multitasking, just read, reflect, or write on one topic. Pay attention to when your brain wants to escape and resist. Track how long it takes before true focus kicks in. Cognitive endurance gives you access to ideas most people never reach because they tap out too early. Metacognition, thinking about thinking. Metacognition is the ability to observe your own thought process, not just what you think, but how you think and why you think that way. It turns your mind into a dashboard, not just a tunnel. It lets you ask, is this belief helping me solve or just helping me feel safe? What bias is shaping this pattern? Am I following evidence or protecting identity? Metacognition gives you steering power. It separates the driver from the impulse. Intellectual compassion. There's a difference between disagreeing and degrading. This kind of thinking brings in intellectual compassion, treating disagreement as a shared search, not a battlefield. It's the choice to say, I see how you got there, even if I landed somewhere else. That's an honest fear. Let's sit with it, even as we think critically. I don't need to win. I want to understand. This doesn't mean tolerating harmful ideas or staying silent. It means refusing to dehumanize the person behind the thought. This doesn't weaken your argument. It deepens your integrity. Reality calibration. This kind of thinking is about aligning your mind as closely as possible to what's real, even if it's inconvenient, boring, or painful. Reality calibration is the practice of checking your perceptions, predictions, and judgments against feedback, evidence, and consequence. It means being willing to revise your model if results contradict it. Letting go of stories that feel good but don't hold up. Seeking disconfirmation more than validation. Reality might not flatter you, but it won't lie to you either. Delayed certainty. Most of us crave closure. We want answers, positions, convictions, but clarity too quickly reached can be a trap. This kind of thinking encourages delayed certainty, intentionally holding space for the unknown without rushing to declare something solved. It means sitting with a difficult question longer than feels comfortable, letting evidence accumulate instead of grabbing the nearest explanation, staying curious rather than certain. Sometimes the most important truths come quietly, after certainty has been suspended. Pattern surrender. We build patterns to navigate the world, but those same patterns can limit us. This kind of thinking invites you to surrender a pattern that once served you, but no longer does. It could be the way you always defend yourself in arguments, the routine that keeps you productive but numbs your creativity, a belief you inherited, not examined. Pattern surrender isn't about chaos, it's about evolution, letting go of familiar maps so better ones can emerge. Growth often comes not by adding, but by releasing. Inner and outer alignment. Clear thinking isn't just intellectual, it's personal. Do your actions match your beliefs? Does your voice match your values? This kind of thinking focuses on inner and outer alignment. Thinking one thing and doing another creates static. Harmony builds power. It means saying no when you mean no. Supporting ideas with action, not just words. Letting your presence reflect your thinking. This kind of clarity isn't loud, but it resonates. Philosophical stillness. You've asked enough questions, challenged enough assumptions, turned enough ideas upside down. Now comes philosophical stillness, the capacity to hold all of it without chasing or rejecting anything. Stillness isn't ignorance, it's deep familiarity with complexity, without the need to fix, fight, or flee. You stop needing every problem to be solved. You start listening to what the silence is saying. Stillness is not the absence of thought, it's the ground from which clarity re-emerges. Embodied wisdom. You've examined logic, ego, fear, bias, story, and system. Now it's time to live what you've learned, not just as concepts, but as presence. Embodied wisdom means listening before speaking, questioning without shaming, letting your mind serve your heart and your heart serve others. This isn't about being flawless, it's about being fully human. At this point, thinking isn't something you do, it's something you are.